and some of the things that I came across. Some people said that they believe that these men didn't actually genuinely want to follow Christ, to be a disciple, but it was customary in the New Testament times, and in this time in particular, where young men would kind of attach themselves and throw themselves on to teachers and famous philosophers because it granted them a certain level of respect in their society. So whether they really wanted to follow Jesus or whether they were just looking for personal gain, I don't know. The Bible doesn't say here, and I don't know for sure enough to say, but whatever their intentions are, we find that 0 out of 3 had what it takes to follow Jesus. And so for just a few minutes, if I could be so bold as to ask you 3 questions that come straight from this text so that you can assess the cost of discipleship, the cost of following Jesus. 3 questions. The first question is this: will you choose comfort or will you choose the cross? Will you choose comfort or will you choose the cross? This first man comes to Jesus and says, Jesus, I'll follow you wherever you go. I'll follow you. And Jesus says, I have nowhere to lay my head each night. If you're going to follow me, we might be homeless. We don't know where we're going to sleep at the end of each day. I'm going to be going from village to village, teaching and preaching. Sometimes we'll travel through the night. You'll have to give up the comforts that you currently enjoy, and the man doesn't follow Jesus. So my question is, will you choose comfort or will you choose the cross? Because for some reason we have this idea in modern day Christianity, or I'll say in American Christianity, where we think that following Jesus is supposed to make our life easier. Where we think that if we follow Jesus, that he's going to immediately make our lives a piece of cake, and he's going to remove all sickness and all disease. He's going to give us the promotions at our job. He's going to give us a comfortable living situation, and everything's going to be okay with our family and with our health and with our churches as long as we are followers of Jesus. But Jesus never said that if you follow him, it was going to be easy. Actually, Jesus said, if any man follow me, let him take up his cross and follow me. The cross, an instrument of death, not something that would provide any sort of comfort whatsoever. It's the opposite. Jesus says in the book of Matthew that except a seed be cast forth into the ground and die, how can it bear forth fruit? And Jesus said that you are going to fall into diverse temptations. You are going to face persecutions. You are going to fall into hardships. So where do we get this idea, particularly in our modern American version of Christianity, that if we follow Jesus, he's going to make our lives here on earth so much easier? Because if I could be just so bold as to say that that's not the case, that in order to follow Christ, we have to give up our comfort and take up the cross. There's a term that used to be well known among churches but is hardly used today. It's something that I read about in missionary books. Well, we don't use this term today, but just a few hundred years ago, it was common. This common phrase would be that missionaries were one-way missionaries, meaning that when missionaries would go to the mission field, they knew all they needed was a one-way ticket to get to across the sea or wherever they were going to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ, because they weren't expected to come back. And they knew that when they went there, they were giving up all of their comfort, and they were either going to live there for the rest of their lives and die of old age, or they were going to be met with severe persecution, and them and their family would be killed. It was called one-way missionaries. But that's unimaginable to us, right, as Americans, because we've become so comfort-driven in America. And we get to sit down at a restaurant and look at a menu and decide what we want to eat, and someone will bring it to us. And we get to decide what temperature we want it to be in this building, or what temperature we want our houses to be. Or on our 15-minute commute to work, we get to decide exactly what temperature we want our car to be. We get everything fast. We have everything we need. We have water and food. We don't worry where our next meal is going to come from. We get to choose not only to have a bed, but we choose what kind of mattress we want to sleep on, what kind of pillow. They make different pillows for if you sleep on your back or if you sleep on your side, or if you're weird and you sleep on your stomach. They make different pillows for however, what's going to make you the most comfortable, whatever is going to be the most comfortable for you to lay your head down each night. We get to choose where we're going to go on vacation. But let me tell you, church, America is the exception. Because the majority of people living in the world today, majority of people don't have the luxury of choosing the comforts that we choose each and every day. I came across one study that said that Americans today are the richest people to have ever lived in all of history. And that a middle-class American today lives far better than most kings did throughout all of history. Better than the kings did. And I'm not trying to tell you that comfort is wrong or that you need to start sleeping outside and giving up all comfort. But I am going to say that could it be that your comfort is getting in the way of you choosing the cross? In just a couple chapters in Luke chapter 12 and verse 16 through 21, Jesus is going to tell a parable about this man who has a farm, and he brought forth a surplus of food and of whatever he was growing. He brought forth a lot more than what he expected. And this man says, what am I going to do? I have this problem because I don't have any room left in my barns to store all of these goods, to store all of this food. What am I going to do? And so the man says to himself, I know what I'll do. I'll do this. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build greater ones so that I can have more, so that I can hold more, so that I can live in even greater comfort. And then I'll say to my soul, soul, thou hast done well. Thou hast laid up treasures for many, many years. I will live a long and comfortable life. But you know what Jesus says in that chapter? He says, thou fool, because this night thy soul is going to be required of thee. And then what good is all of that stuff, all of that comfort going to do for you? Could it be that there's a young man or a young lady in this room who God wants to call to the mission field, but you couldn't live without your comfort? Christians, there are souls out in the world who need our help, but it may involve you having to move out of your comfort zone. It may involve you having to find yourselves in awkward situations where you tell people about Christ and they reject you. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with giving up what's comfortable so that you can choose the cross? Are you willing to go out of your comfort zone to share the gospel? Are you willing to go out of your comfort zone to live as a follower, as a disciple of Christ? Will you choose comfort or will you choose the cross? Here's the second question. Jesus says in verse 59, this is the only one where Jesus calls out to the man and he says, follow me. But this man says, Lord, suffer me first to go and bury my father. And scholars debate in this text whether this man's father was already dead, if he had passed away, and this man's just saying, let me go and, literally just perform the funeral service for my father, and then I'll follow you. Or the more accepted scholars agree more that this was a phrase where his father was not dead yet, but his father was dying, so he had to wait until he could go and bury his father. Either way, it doesn't really matter to me. Jesus' response, it sounds rather brash. Because whether this man, let's just say this man's father's not even dead yet, but he's dying. He says, let me go and take care of my father. I'm the oldest son. It's my responsibility to take care of the father, to take care of my father. Let me just go and take care of him. And Jesus says, the dead can bury their own dead. Go thou and preach the kingdom of God. And to our ears, that sounds harsh. That sounds brash. But it's because Jesus here is obviously communicating that there's something of greater importance. The second question is this: is your attitude towards missions urgent or indifferent? Is your attitude towards missions urgent or indifferent? You know, the moment that you lose someone close to you, like a father or a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, a spouse, a child, the moment that you lose that person, there's just no words to describe that raw emotion. And I remember when my grandpa passed away, and I remember my dad getting the call at the kitchen table and answering the call. And it was one of the very few times that I've seen my dad cry. But I could just tell by the look on his face that, it was kind of expected, that it was going to happen any day now. But I couldn't imagine if Jesus was there and in that raw moment of emotion, just losing someone, that Jesus says, "Let the dead bury their dead." But you know why that sounds so brash and harsh to us? Is because we don't understand the urgency of missions like Jesus does. Because we don't see what Jesus sees every single second. There's one study that says 160,000 people die each day. 160,000 people. That's 7,000 per hour. 111 people per minute, which is 1.85 or almost 2 people every single second are going off into eternity to live in either heaven or hell. And we don't think about that. We don't see that. But Jesus, being all-knowing, being omniscient, Jesus sees every single second people going off into eternity and spending forever in hell. And so that's why he's calling in this verse. He says, "Follow me." And that's why he's pleading with us to follow him. And that's why he pleads with us over and over and over in the Gospels to follow him and to tell people about Christ. Because we don't see it. We're reminded of it sometimes, but we don't see the number, the hordes of people who are sent every single day to hell. And we are pretty good at coming up with, I'll be real, we come up with good excuses. Good excuses. This man just wants to go back and take care of his dying father. That's a good excuse. But Jesus says there's something of so much far greater importance. You don't even understand the urgency. You don't even understand what's taking place around you. Jesus is going to say in just a few verses in chapter 10 that the harvest is plenteous, but the laborers are few. And why is that? Why are there so few that are willing to labor when there is a harvest that is so great? When are we going to not be okay with the over 4,000 different unreached people groups is what they're called, where there's over 4,000 nationalities of people where neither them nor their parents, nor their siblings, nor their children, nor anyone that they know the gospel. They just don't know it. They're unreached. Over 7,000 different people groups. 42% of the world, according to one study, the Joshua Project, says that 42% of the world is unreached. When is that number not going to be okay with us? Why is it that we're not all going to tell these people? And this is why I struggle with this text. It's because what am I doing? I give to missions every month, but I could do more. I could give more. I don't want to settle into a life of indifference. I don't want to completely ignore the fact that every day thousands of people are going off to spend eternity in hell and they've never heard the name Jesus in their life. Is your attitude towards missions urgent or indifferent? Here's the last question. In verse 61, Another man says to Jesus, Lord, I'll follow thee, but let me just first bid them farewell, which are home at my house. And if the second man's request is reasonable, the third man's request definitely sounds reasonable. But Jesus, he doesn't just hear the words that he says, but he sees his heart. And he says that no man, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. Jesus saw this man's heart and knew that either he was going to go back, and when he was saying his goodbyes, he would not be able to leave them again, or that he would go and say goodbye, and he would go and he would follow Jesus, but for the rest of his life, he'd constantly be looking back at where he came from and constantly looking around at what others are doing. If you would please turn to chapter 12, Luke chapter 12, and verse number 51. If I ever get the chance to preach a Christmas message, this is the text I'm going to preach. Jesus said in verse 51, Suppose ye that I come to give peace on earth? I tell you no, but rather division. For from henceforth there shall be 5 in one house divided, and 3 against 2, 2 against 3. The father shall be divided against the son, and the son against the father, and the mother against the daughter, and so on and so on. And if you turn the page and go to chapter 14 and verse number 26, Luke 14:26, Jesus is still talking, and he says, If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children, brethren, sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whosoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? And I've heard messages, and you might have heard messages before from this verse where it's talking about financial, the financial truth in this passage. But Jesus isn't talking about finances when he says count the cost. He's talking about being a follower, a disciple of Jesus. He says, have you considered the cost? Before you follow me, have you considered what the cost, the high cost is for this high calling? You see, each one of these men that we read about, they were going to follow Jesus, but they each had a stipulation. And what Jesus is saying, not because Jesus doesn't want people to follow him, but Jesus, if I could just say it this way, Jesus is just being real with them here in these verses. And he's saying that following me, following Jesus, is either an I have decided to follow Jesus, or I have not decided to follow Jesus. But here's what I'm so concerned about, is that our modern American view of Christianity is we have people who know Jesus and people who come to church, but people who aren't willing to pay the cost, and people who aren't willing to be a genuine disciple of Jesus. Is your mind made up? Have you chosen to follow Jesus? Well, yeah, I'll follow Jesus, after I grow up and after I finish high school. I'll follow Jesus after I get married, after I have a family, then I'll start following Jesus. I'll start following Jesus. I'll be a disciple, after this health stuff gets figured out in my life, after my family is secure, after I'm financially stable. But Jesus is saying to this last man that there are no stipulations. It's either you follow Jesus or you don't. Many times when I have like a big decision coming up and I'm wondering and I'm praying about a decision, God, what do you want me to do? Oftentimes I'll make that decision and if I could I put my hand to the plow and I'm going, but then I look around and I think, was that the right decision? Did I do the right thing? A lot of times I'm very slow to make a decision, but oftentimes our indecisiveness just turns into disobedience. Which it's just crazy, because if I was at the lake and I saw a child drowning in the lake, I'm not going to bounce it off of others. Hey, do you think I should go in and save this child who's drowning? I'm not going to go find 3 counselors and ask them their opinion. I'm not going to, okay, well, let me get ready. Let me take off my shoes. Let me, put on some swim trunks because I don't want to get, my nice suit wet. No, if someone's drowning, if there's a child drowning, I'm just going to jump in. I don't care if my phone's in my pocket. I don't care if my wallet and keys are in my pocket. I'm just going to go all in. Why don't we do the same thing? Why don't I do the same thing when it comes to following Christ? We know the right thing to do. And we need to make up our minds to determine today that we're going to live for Christ. This morning, I told you it was going to be quick, but I have 3 questions for you to ask yourself. 3 questions. Will you choose comfort or will you choose the cross? Is your attitude towards missions urgent or indifferent? And then the last question, will our lives be marked by indecisive minds or determined hearts? Will our lives be marked by indecisive minds or determined hearts? And this is why I struggle so much with this message and why I was just pouring out my heart to God last night. Why I couldn't sleep is because when I look at Luke chapter 9 and I see these 3 men, I see myself right there. And I think about decisions that I've made in my life and decisions that I even make today. Because if I'm being honest, I love comfort. I love my comfort. And if I'm being honest, there are people where I don't share the gospel with them. My attitude towards missions isn't as urgent as it should be. Oftentimes I'm indecisive. And I see myself here in this text. And when I ask myself those 3 questions, will I choose comfort or the cross? I'm just being transparent. Sometimes I choose comfort. My attitude towards missions, is it urgent or indifferent? Oftentimes it's indifferent. Is my life marked by a decisive mind or an indecisive heart? I'm often indecisive. And when I look at myself, I think I don't have what it takes. I don't have what it takes to be a disciple. If this is the cost to be a disciple, I don't know if I can do it. And this is why I'm struggling so much. But the Lord last night gave this passage to my heart and to my mind, and I want to share it with you. It's in Matthew. If you want to, in Matthew chapter 11, you can turn there. In Matthew chapter 11, and just 3 verses here, verses we're familiar with, but Jesus says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus has everything that you need to be his disciple. And when I look at myself, maybe when you look at yourself, you see the inadequacy. You don't see it within yourself to be able to pay the high cost for this high calling. But Jesus says here in these verses that he has what you need to be his disciple. Because we're not alone. And we don't have to go through it alone. Many of you are familiar with this term, with the yoke, which was a farming term where they would have this wooden structure that they would put on 2 bulls, and that's what they would use to pull their farming equipment. And what Jesus is saying here is that you don't have to carry that burden on your own. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to take that burden for you. A high calling comes with a high price, but he has what you need to be his disciple. I would just want to finish with this statement, that knowing Jesus is not the same as following Jesus. And my honest prayer for the message today is that you would just see this text and it would jump out to you in Luke 9:57 to 62, and that you would see maybe yourself there. And one of those three questions, if not, in my case, all three of those questions, I see areas where I fall short, where I often fail. And my prayer for you is that you would recognize that, and that today you would ask God, you would ask Jesus to invite his yoke on you so that you don't have to go through life by yourself, and you don't have to carry the burdens by yourself, but you can carry it with